All right, we've got that Chrysler 8 1/4 rear axle here tore down, or starting to tear down, getting it drained up. We're going to strip it all. And I noticed here, look how much rust we have on the gear set and inside the housing. That's from this thing just sitting so long. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'm sure when we turn it down here, we might get a little bit of water come out of it as well. But that's not a big issue, because on this one, we're going to be replacing the gear, the carrier with a Detroit True Track limited slip, and then of course carrier bearings and both pinion bearings. And then out here on the axle ends, we're going to get new axle bearings as well. We'll have to make sure we take a good look at those shafts when we get those out. And then also one thing we're going to do, these things hang down quite a bit on the XJ. We're going to cut these off, and we're going to run the shock mounts a little higher on the tube, hopefully not hanging down much, if any, past the tube, which means our shock is going to be too long. But in preparation for this, when we ordered this kit, it's a 4-inch kit, we ordered it with shocks for a 2-inch kit. So essentially, we can move this shock mount up a couple of inches, and we should still have a decent amount of shock travel. So let's get this thing drained and apart. Fluid doesn't look too bad. It looks kind of thin, like maybe it's not gear oil, but usually water settled like that would come out first. We'll just turn this thing all the way up here. Okay, we got the shafts pretty much inspected, and both of them look good, we thought. But this one here had been sitting so long with water in it, I guess, that it just rusted up. But I've taken a emery cloth to this over and over and over again, and you can just feel, just with your nail, you can feel the gouges where that rust is just kind of digging in and working into that metal. So we're gonna go ahead and replace this one shaft. The other shaft looked really good. The other shaft looked like this right here all the way across. So you've got the part where the bearing rides, and then the seal rides out here, and the other shaft looks great all the way around. All right, we have an axle that is completely cleaned up and ready to go back together. So we're gonna, actually I forgot, we've still got axle bearings and seals to pull out, but we've sanded the tubes down, knocked off all the rust, gotten into these cracks and crevices as best as we can. And one other thing that we did, since this is an 8 1/4 that a lot of people don't do, is down here on the bottom there was a rib down about 5/8 of an inch. So we ground that completely smooth. You can see right there where it used to be. So that is ground down completely. So with the solid diff cover on there, it should look pretty slick. And we've got a 456 gear, all new bearings, and a Detroit True Track to put in there. All right, moving on to the rear suspension for a little bit. We've got the leaf spring hung and the shackle in place. We're actually going to check, because I believe on certain models This is the hole for the 5.5-inch kit, and then this is the hole for the 4-inch. So we're gonna move this up to this hole just to lower the ride height just a little bit. And let me go to the other side and we'll show you how we assembled this. All right, so on the rear springs here, we're using several things. So we've got this super lube, which we got from Harbor Freight, I believe. And then also some anti-seize. So what we're gonna do is apply the anti-seize to the shoulders of the bolts, and then a little bit on the threads, just enough right here to coat that so that those can be removed in case of future service. Now, we got really lucky with this one. These came out. I've seen multiple occasions in the past, and I've wanted to just go ahead and kill over because they are difficult to remove. And that's if that little guy right there gets seized up or stripped out. It's all kinds of work. And then back here, you've got another one up in there for the shackle hanger. So what we've done, we are going to put the super lube on the surfaces right here of the polyurethane bushing. That way this thing can pivot real smoothly. And then the shoulder of the bolt is going to get the anti-seize and a little bit on threads. That way that bolt does not seize up to that sleeve and it can be removed for future purposes. All right, so we've got this bolt tight, and I'll show you why we get this tight on this particular style. This bolt bottoms out on the sleeve, so you can still freely move the shackle. Now, if this shackle was factory and had the rubber bushing in it with the pressed in sleeve, then you wouldn't want to tighten this bolt until the weight of the Jeep is completely on the ground. So in this case, we've got a nice free movement, and that bolt is already torqued and we don't have to worry about going back and checking it. While we have the poly lube out, these new sway bar bushings are also a polyurethane, so we'll put that super lube in there. That way this thing can pivot real nicely. Now, one thing to note on Cherokees, you can have this sway bar probably, I think, 5 or 6 different diameters. This particular one is a 25.4, which is a 1-inch sway bar. So make sure you get the correct bushings for that sway bar. These are a Moog part number K3171. All right, so this is our steering gearbox spacer that goes up here between the steering box and the unibody. And these things are prone for failure. It's an aluminum piece. So we picked up this from JCR, and basically you just take the 3 bolts out, take that piece out, put this one in, and they give you longer bolts to go back in. So we're gonna put that in now. We've made some significant progress on the Jeep today. As you can see here, we've got the sway bar on with those new bushings. We had to go get some hardware. We got the JCR plate in there, and I don't know why, but I welded the old washer to all of this, so that's why this one doesn't have that same silver washer on it. But that's in. And then one benefit of this JCR bracket is it's got a 4th hole back here. That way you can add another 1/2-inch bolt. And then we've got the sway bar links. They're kind of crooked right now, but that's because there's no engine in this. But the correct link steering is intact. Everything's connected. We're not gonna put a steering stabilizer on this yet until we get this thing driving and running and aligned. One thing to note about the Curry steering is over here on this bracket here. Sorry for the glare there of the sunlight, but this one here, there's a notch cut out in this. So you need to make sure before you put this stud in that cotter pin hole is lined up with this. You know, I've seen people tighten this nut down and the cotter pin need to be up and down, and then they have to drive this back out and risk damaging that. So anyway, we had to go get some hardware. I went and got some crimp lock nuts for this, or I'm sorry, some nylon lock nuts and some big fender washers to capture that bushing so that there was no way that could fail. And remember, these brackets had a spline stud in them, so that's why we had to put a new bolt there. So we had to go get that. This side here has the new brake hose and the caliper on it, and we are still waiting for the caliper for the driver's side, but it is coming together nicely and should be on its feet by the end of the weekend. We need to get these axle bearings and seals out, and what we're using is a slide hammer. Has that little attachment on it, and what we're going to do is we run this nut down in this washer. This thing has two different spots. You want to put it in the one that has the farthest, that looks most parallel to the nut, or to the threaded rod. I'm going to stick that in there, and then you can get it to pop behind the bearing, and then we're going to run down this nut to kind of hold that thing in place. So what we've done is gone through the bearing, and then that has turned sideways, and now it's captured the back side of that bearing. And this is going to be what you do on like Dana 35s, Chrysler 8 1/4, Chrysler 9 1/4, GM 10 and 12 bolts. And then we're just going to take the slide hammer. Sometimes we need to tighten that nut a little bit more after the first few swings. All right, so now what we've done is we've pulled out that bearing and that seal, and then you'll run the nut down, and then we can slide the bearing and the seal off, and then we can go ahead and get us some new bearings and seals. We're going to clean this housing end up, get all the goo out of there. The bearing's a little rusty, so good thing we're putting those in, but we're going to clean that up, and then we can reassemble this rear axle and get it back to the home shop and get that thing installed. One thing to note on the Chrysler 8 1/4 is these ring gear bolts are left-hand thread. Pinion bearings and carrier bearings are pressed on. The ring gear bolts have red Loctite on them, and they have been torqued. So we are ready to get back over to the axle housing and get this ring and pinion set up. We didn't document the procedure on the rear axle, but we've got this thing here cleaned up, sanded, painted, set up. We've got 6,000s backlash to let you hear that. Everything looks good. This is a Detroit True Track in here. And then of course this one has the little lock pins on each side that will lock into the teeth there for the adjuster that's down in there. There's a tooth on the bottom of this that locks in there, so you'll torque those bolts after you torque the main caps on. And yeah, we're ready to go. So we're going to take this thing back to the other shop and get this put in. All right, we've got the rear axle bolted in now. U-bolts are torqued on both sides. I think the spec on those U-bolts is around 100 foot-pounds. We've gone over those a few times evenly. Got those all squared away. That housing was painted with the steelets, so we've got a few coats on there. Turned out really nice looking. We're still gonna have to scuff it up and put some shock mounts on. But up here underneath, in this area here, you can see we've got a broken bolt I forgot about. So that's the only one that's broken. So probably what we're gonna end up doing is maybe welding a little bar pin eliminator or something in there. We've got new brake hardware, new wheel cylinders, new brake shoes, and it's got all the new adjusters and the springs and all that. And then we also got new drums. We had to paint these. They come just bare, unlike some of the front rotors you can get. But this, I spared you the joy of laughing at me by not videoing this, but it was a little bit of a chore. Almost needed 3 or 4 hands to do that. But anyway, that's back together and we are moving on. Gonna put these drums on and get this rear end buttoned up. All right, we got those drum brakes all finished up and we have got this Rusty's brake hose attached. So all we need now is to grab a piece of vacuum line or vent hose that goes from here up here to the frame. So that, well, lack of frame. So it goes up here to the unibody and then comes down here to the axle for the axle vent. One thing I did forget to mention is down in here where the C-clips go, we've got this pin right here that slides in there between the two shafts to keep the C-clips in. And what we've got is this piece that gets held in here with a snap ring. And if you watch, we can get it in there, just barely. Somehow. I've done this before. There we go. So we got that in there, but it is a 1/4 inch too big to fit down in that hole. So Eaton must have packaged this limited slip incorrectly, because the outer diameter of this is about a 1/4 inch bigger than this hole. So we're gonna try to figure that out. If we can't figure that out quick enough, then I'll have a friend machine this down on his lathe, and we'll get some video of that if we have to do it. But this plug goes in to hold the C-clips in, and see how I can spin it and push it in all the way, and we can see the snap ring groove now. So that plug was too large of a diameter, and I had to have a machine shop cut it down. So that's all finished up, and I just need to find a snap ring now too, because this thing has been on the shelf for a while and we cannot get anybody to answer a call or help us out to get this plug or that snap ring. So we already had that, it was just too big, it was probably packaged incorrectly. So we're gonna go ahead and grab a snap ring and get that put back together.